इति नामिने नमः।
श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी इति नामिने
नमस्ते सरस्वती गौरवाणी
निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे
प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि
जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद
हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. गिरवरधारी
जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरवरधारी
जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरवरधारी
यशोदानंदन Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We'll read from this handout. Sri Namamrita, the nectar of the holy name. The chanting of the holy name is the holy remedy for setting the world aright.
Over the class.
अंशु को दिए थे ना अंशु के फोल्डर में रखे हैं
Everybody can come a little forward.
This is from the book Sri Namamrita, Nectar of the Holy Name. This section is entitled The chanting of the holy name is the holy remedy for setting the world aright. The work of Maya is called Durashraya, which means false or bad shelter. One who puts his faith in Durashraya becomes a candidate for hoping against hope. In this material world, everyone is trying to become happy, and although the material attempts are baffled in every way due to their nescience, they cannot understand their mistakes. This is the way of the struggle for existence in the material world. If one in this condition is advised to take to Krishna consciousness and be happy, he does not accept such instructions. The Krishna consciousness movement is being spread all over the world just to remedy this gross ignorance. People in general are misled by blind leaders. The leaders of human society, the politicians, philosophers, and scientists are blind because they are not Krishna conscious. According to the Bhagavad Gita, because they are bereft of all factual knowledge due to their atheistic way of life, they're actually simple rascals and are the lowest among men. This verse from the Bhagavad Gita, verse 7:15 says, Namam duskritino muda prapadyante naradama maya apratagyana asuram bhavam ashrita. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender to me. Such people never surrender to Krishna. They oppose the endeavor of those who wish to take Krishna's shelter. When such atheists become leaders of society, the entire atmosphere is surcharged with nescience. In such a condition, people do not become very enthusiastic to receive Krishna consciousness movement, just as a diseased person suffering from jaundice does not relish the taste of sugar candy. However, one must know for jaundice, sugar candy is the only specific medicine. Similarly, in the present confused state of humanity, Krishna consciousness, the chanting of the holy name of Lord Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, is the only remedy for setting the world aright. So, today, I think you're celebrating your 1 year anniversary of starting your.
Yeah, today we complete 1 year.
So, a lot of work has gone in, specifically by Devendra and Trupti, to organize every week, regardless of who comes. They're always ready, right? So everybody has stuff going on every Sunday. And the audience keeps rotating, but the hosts are constant. They're always here, they're always ready, they're always available. And so they're doing a great job of organizing this event every Sunday. And the more we take advantage of this, the better it is for us. Because we recognize the value, and then we take advantage of it. So today's section we read was about the chanting of the holy name is the holy and the only remedy really for setting the world right. Can you get the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, please? Does anybody have any questions on what we read before I start talking about it?
No.
No questions?
No.
What is your name? I've never
Rachit.
met you before.
Rachit.
Rachit. Good to meet you. And your name?
Babita.
Good to meet you. So if there are no questions, then does that mean that you're all convinced of this?
I'm not.
Then we should have questions.
What I don't understand is like everywhere they say if you don't follow instructions, something bad is going to happen to you, or if you don't understand this, you're not bound to, have faith in God. What I don't understand is why is faith? Let me put it. I'm trying to put it in the right words.
Say any word, doesn't matter. You're not going to offend me. So.
No. I don't want to offend anybody. That's why I'm trying to be careful with my words. But like, why is faith related to a particular book or a particular thinking?
Right.
Everybody has their own faith.
Right.
There are different religions. People say different things.
Right.
Why
That's
do
good.
we think that we are right and everybody else is wrong?
So that is not, first of all, that is not, it's an excellent question, and thank you for raising that, and I'll address that for a good 20 minutes or at least, if not more. Because that's a very important question. Maybe a lot of people have that question, and Rachid had the courage to ask it, so let's discuss it in detail. It's a good question, excellent question, and so we should talk about it in detail and make sure it's something that we comprehend and really accept and internalize as opposed to, So it goes back to the whole premise of. So typically, for doing anything in the world, there are some right ways to do it and some wrong ways to do it. That doesn't apply to, just take religion out of that mix for a second right now. Just anything, right? If you want to drive a car, there's a right way to drive, there's not a right way to drive. So it's not a question of opinion, but it is a question of what kind of line of work are you in?
I'm a software engineer.
Okay, so in your software field, right, if you have to write some program, there's a right way to write it and there's a wrong way to write it. If you write it the wrong way, it's not going to work. Right? There's certain ways. In a recipe book, you cannot argue with the recipe book. The recipe book says this is what you need to do. If you can argue with it, but the results are going to be very different. Right? Since I'm a cook, I always give recipe examples. That if you can argue with the recipe book, if you want to bake a cake and it requires 350 degrees in the oven, that's what it needs. If you argue with the recipe book, you're entitled to do that. The results are not going to come out. You're not going to make the cake the way it is supposed to be intended to make. So the idea of rules and regulations is not an alien concept. It's not something that's introduced only in the realm of religion. It's for things to work, there have to be rules and regulations. If people do what they want, even in traffic, the only reason you, assuming you drove here and you drove on the road, the only reason you're convinced that the person who's driving in the lane next to you is not going to slam into your car because you're reasonably convinced that that person is going to follow rules and drive in his lane. If you had no conviction that the person is going to drive in his lane, you give an indicator, you change your lane, you're reasonably sure that the person who's in the other lane is going to understand that you're trying to change lanes. He's not going to try to ram into your car. So in life, in general, for things to work, there are rules, right? And the rules are set by people who are authorities in that particular field. Like you go to a doctor if you have an ailment, and the doctor gives you some kind of remedy that this is your problem, this is how you need to take your medicine or regimen, then unless you're a doctor and know that field better than the person who's suggesting it to you, you follow it. You don't argue with the doctor saying, you're asking me to take these 3 pills, 1 pill 3 times a day, which is 3 pills a day, for over a period of 10 days. Why not I eat 30 pills today? I'll get better right now. I don't want to wait 10 days and 3 pills, 1 time for lunch and breakfast and dinner. Why not me eat 30 pills right now and I'll get better? You probably get killed if that is your approach. Right? A medication that you take 30 times the dosage, probably not a good day for you after that. So, in life, in general, we have no problem following a structure and rules in most places. Most civilized society has no problem following rules and regulations in most places. And we subject ourselves to the superior knowledge of folks who we allow them to understand that there's superior knowledge residing in them. If they're a doctor, if they're a medical practitioner, there's certain knowledge that you attribute to that individual because of which you accept what they're saying. You may not fully understand what they're saying. You don't have to, right? If you go to your physician and they say this is what you need to do, you accept it. You may take second opinion or whatever else, but still, by and large, you accept the medication. You're not personally going and checking out how that pharmaceutical product is created. You're not trying to figure out what quality control measures the pharmaceutical company has, what ingredients went in. You by and large accept it that, okay, this medication that somebody that I don't even know has created, and somebody I don't even know is selling, and somebody I don't even know personally is prescribing to me, is going to benefit me. You have that implicit faith. So what I'm trying to point out is that things that we consider rational and scientific, there's so much faith associated with it. And things that we consider faith-based is also rational and scientific, which just because we have not been trained in the science of God, we think that that's something that you can make up as you go along. That's also science. Just like you have material sciences, you have spiritual sciences. Just like you have the science of physics and quantum mechanics, it's not something that you can just make up. It's a science. Similarly, spiritual science is a science. And there's a very specific study that needs to happen for you to be able to comprehend that science. So it's not like you can just not have any background and have any understanding and refuse to have any understanding and say that, well, since I don't understand it, it's obviously faith-based and it's based on somebody's made up logic. Doesn't have any basis to it. So similarly, a person who doesn't understand quantum mechanics can easily say, I have never seen these packets of energy and never seen any of this. So how do I know you're not making it all up? I have no faith in this. This is all faith-based. How do you know there's a proton, electron? How do you know all these things? It's just all made up. But then maybe you could see an experiment. And I'm taking you back to your high school physics. This experiment called Michelson-Morley experiment. Do you know what that experiment is? So you basically have X-rays that are directed at an X-ray film, and then you have a positive charge and a negative charge, and based on which charge is active, the electrons decide to go. So you see dots on the X-ray either on the left or the right based on where the thing is going. Now, there are some kids who went upstairs, right, who are in maybe 10, 12 years old. I show them the experiment, and I show them the dots on the X-ray and say, this proves that there are electrons. Their reaction is going to be that all this proves that there are some dots on the X-ray. What doesn't prove anything else. So what that means, unless you have the background science and the knowledge that you understand how the experiment is set up, even if I prove it to you, that proof is meaningless. So for the proof to have some meaning, you have to understand the science. So once you get to high school and maybe you get to first year college courses, then you understand, yes, I see the proof, and the proof means that this is what the premise is true, based on your understanding of the subject. But if I show somebody that subject and the experiment and say this is the proof, it's going to be hard to understand. So the premise I'm making right now, the statement I'm making right now is that things that we consider as purely faith-based are also very scientific, if you take the effort and the time to understand the science behind it. And things that we implicitly understand to be scientific are also heavily faith-based. Because unless you have faith, and then you acquire the knowledge to be able to understand the proof that explains the faith, it's just faith. Right? So that is the first point I was trying to make. And the first point was again regarding the rules and regulations. The second point was regarding the fact that faith and knowledge are it's not as clear cut as people want it to be. The third point regarding religion, the question is why religion is such a source of conflict in one sense, right? People consider I'm right, you're wrong, this is right, that's wrong. So the definition of Shastra or religion in the Vedic version is very simple. It says, there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the first canto, second chapter, which says, Savai punsam paro dharmo yato bhaktir adhokshaje ahaituki apratiyata yatmasu prasidati. What that means is that the highest religion among people in general, among all people, is to have devotion to the Supreme Lord. Now, this is not sectarian. The Vedic version is not sectarian. It does not say this is right, that is wrong. Prabhupada always said, in Prabhupada's preach, he would say that the objective of religion is to answer three questions. Who are you? Ultimately, who are you? I mean, is your identity a software engineer? Had you decided to become a medical practitioner, would you be a different person? No. So, what are your designations? You may be from India, you may be residing in the Reading area, you might be a software professional. All those are designations. But who are you really? That's the basic question that a religious process has to answer. Who are you? Who's God? And what is your relationship with God? And then, in the theistic field, the theistic science that we have, we understand that there is God. Creator. The God is a creator. There's only one God. It's not like there's a Hindu God and a Muslim God or a Christian God or Jewish God. There's one God. God is God. And the objective of any bona fide religion is to understand how you can establish your relationship with that God. Because according to Shastra, the hypothesis like any scientific process, you have a hypothesis. So I have to give you a hypothesis, and I have to give you a process to verify that hypothesis. Like any scientific process, right? I cannot just make a claim and then say, well, there's no basis for validating this claim. It's just a claim. You have to accept it. So the hypothesis is that, in the Vedic religion, the hypothesis is that the only way you can really be happy is establishing a relationship with God, with Krishna. We call him Krishna. Krishna means the one who's most attractive. That's the name of God. You can have, God has many names, just like, you may have many names, right? I mean, you call Rachit here, you may be called something else when you were little. The person is the same. Your child is going to call you daddy, so she's not going to call you Rachit when she grows up. So you have, even a single individual has so many identities. So God has many names. God has many, many names. So in the Vedic version, the hypothesis is that the only way you can really be happy. So first of all, the Vedic version says that the objective of human life is to be happy. So unless someone is psychologically disturbed, most people will accept this premise, that the objective of life is to be happy. So most sane people will accept that the objective of human life is to become happy. So the question is, how do you become happy? Right? So if I give you a goal, but give you no mechanism to actually reach that goal, then it's not an adequate instruction. It's not a complete instruction. So the premise is you need to be happy. Everybody has a right to be happy. So simply saying that your right is to be happy, but do whatever you want to be happy. Then you're going to do all sorts of things and then realize that all the things that I did didn't really make me happy. I did a bunch of things, I did activity, but am I happy? The answer is, I don't know. Somebody might think that, okay, drinking a whole bottle of whiskey is going to make me happy. It just makes him sick. At the end of the day, he doesn't feel happy in the real sense. If he was happy, then happiness is something that should last. It should not start with happiness and end in misery. Right? The definition of true happiness, and the Bhagavad Gita talks about happiness in the mode of ignorance, in the mode of passion, mode of goodness. So happiness in the mode of ignorance is miserable when it's there and also miserable afterwards. As someone who wants to be happy by drinking alcohol. Ultimately, the result is not a very positive one. You become an alcoholic if you want, or if you drink too much alcohol. It's not going to result in, most stories around, I drank a whole bottle of whiskey, don't end in a very positive, manner, where either you do something stupid to embarrass yourself, or in general, it's not a good ending. Happiness in the mode of passion is also such like that. It's temporary and usually doesn't have a great ending. But the happiness in the mode of goodness is the one that lasts and really gives you good happiness. Right? So, like, happiness is also in different modes. So then, the Shastras talk about what is the highest happiness. The highest happiness can be achieved, and this verse I quoted earlier it says that the true happiness can be achieved by the soul by connecting with God. And the reason for that is described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. He says that the reason for that is you're not the body of the soul. So the real you is not the physical body, because the physical body keeps changing. The real you is the soul inside of that body. And practically we realize, even in language, linguistics, you say my hand, my head, my heart, right? But then who's that you? Just like you say, it's my car, linguistically, and understanding that's your car, that's not you. Right? You may love your car, but it's still not you. Some people may think they're their car, they identify with their car, but they're still not you. It's your house, you live because you live in that house, but that's not you. Your identity is separate from your house. If you choose to move to another house, your identity doesn't change. It's still you, but it's in a different house. Now your concept of saying it's my house you pointing to a different house and saying that's my house. Right? Earlier, like I recently bought another car. So before that, I had another car and I would point to that car and say, this is my car. And I point to a different car and say, this is my car. But the person me is still different from those two cars. I realize that. Similarly, the body is not you. That is the first basic understanding of the Shastra. And most religions understand that. And some may not fully explore it, and some may fully explore it. But the understanding is there. When somebody passes away, somebody dies, the euphemism that's used is he's gone. But he may be lying right there, the body might be right there, but still people say he's gone. What is gone? Body is still there. So if you identify with the body is still there. And the people who consider that person so dear, after a couple of days will be afraid to sit in the same room with that dead body. They will not want anything to do with that dead body. Because they understand that the body is not you. The real you, the consciousness, the source of consciousness is gone. And that is the soul. So since you're the soul, you're not that body, the true you is the soul, then only satisfying the body alone will not make you happy. And that is the premise of the Shastra. The Shastra says that the body has to be nourished because it's the dwelling place for the soul. Just like your house has to be kept clean. This is not an excuse for keeping your house like a pigsty. Because you live in the house, you cannot say, since I'm not the house, why should I clean my house? No, since you live in the house has to be clean so that it's a suitable dwelling place for you. Similarly, the body is a suitable dwelling place for the soul. The body has to be maintained healthy so that you can then execute your duties and so on and so forth. But ultimately, you have to understand that the body becomes a tool for the soul to execute the goal of life, which is to understand who's God, how can I establish relationship with God. So the Shastra, the Bhagavad Gita, explains very clearly in this verse that we read, explains that ultimately the way you can become happy is to establish the connection with God. And the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya started by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches us that the way to establish that connection with God is to chant God's name and build that connection with God. So if you read the Bhagavad Gita does not claim in any part of the Bhagavad Gita that the objective of the Vedic Dharma is to believe something. There's no such requirement. There's no requirement. The Bhagavad Gita does not say that you believe this and you should be saved. Or you believe this concept, or you subscribe to this concept and you will be saved. It gives you a process. It makes a hypothesis, it gives you a process. You follow the process and you can experience the results for your own self. So just like any scientific process, someone says that this is how you can make this chemical product, if you say I don't believe you, then my response would be that's an unintelligent response. Because I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm saying this is a chemical process. I'm saying this is how I make this particular chemical. And if you don't believe me, you have every possibility of executing the same experiment and achieving the same result. Because if it's a scientific process, it should be repeatable. Right? So when someone says this is how this thing is done, like if you read a How Things Get Made book, right? They have these encyclopedias. They're not saying you should believe them. It's not a book of belief. They're not saying believe this. No, they're saying this is how this particular thing is made. Right? If you see a recipe book, it says this is how you're going to make this cake. And your response could be, I don't believe this recipe. Has no meaning. That kind of response has no meaning. So the answer to that question is, did you follow the recipe? Did you make it exactly the way it was done? And if your answer is, no, I don't believe the recipe, I don't think I'm going to make it, then that doesn't really make any sense. Or if you choose to make the recipe but choose to add your own ideas in it. Say, instead of 1 cup of water, I'm going to add 6 cups of water. Right? It's not going to work. So that's why you end up having a situation where the Bhagavad Gita gives you a premise and gives you a process that you can follow to see the results. Just like any experiment that you do, right? There are certain laboratory conditions that you got to simulate, right? So if you do an experiment, a chemistry experiment, then in order to get the results, you got to make sure your equipment is clean. Right? If you're doing mixing chemicals, you cannot have dirty beakers, you cannot have dirty equipment, because you're not going to get the results you expect. So similarly, when we're following a spiritual experiment, spiritual process, it's important that the body that we have, that's become the instrument for following this particular process, is a clean system. So the idea is that you live a certain life, you live a certain way. So the rules and regulations that are prescribed are allowing you to create a system within your body that allows you to practice a spiritual process. So the idea is not that this is the process that is right and every other process is wrong. Any bona fide process that allows you to understand who are you, who is God, and build a relationship with God is a bona fide process. A religious process that does not answer these questions is made up, it's bogus. It doesn't have to be Krishna consciousness, doesn't have to be... Ultimately, any process that answers this question is Krishna consciousness. Whether you actively taking the name of God as Krishna or you chanting the name of God as Allah, doesn't matter. You're still chanting the same person's name. As long as your objective is to understand that individual and establish relationship with that individual, it doesn't matter. If you don't have a process, this is a process that Srila Prabhupada gave us. We are not concocting a process. This is a process that, it's not my invention or anything. This process has been given to us by disciplic succession. It's bona fide, it works. Now we have two choices. Either we accept the process that we know that works, or we try to do independent research and try to find all processes that might work. And in the limited time that I have left on this planet, I choose not to waste my time and actually follow a process that I know works. So that is the situation we're in. So each person has to come to that conclusion on your own, where you feel that, okay, first of all, do I have a spiritual goal or not? And if I don't have a spiritual goal, what happens? And if I have a spiritual goal, what happens? So the fact that all of you are sitting here means that you have some inclination, whether it's greater or lesser, depends on the degree of inclination you have, but some inclination, because nobody can force anybody to come here. So you have some inclination. Now that you have some inclination, it behooves us as rational people to actually explore rationally. So there's no question of anybody saying, well, you come here and you have to believe this, and you believe this, you should be saved. No. It's not a belief thing. It's not like you believe something and go away. It's like you go to a doctor. It doesn't matter whether you believe in the medicine or not. If you take the medicine, it'll act on you. Similarly, a scientific process has been given. If you want to become healthy and strong, if you go to the gym, they'll teach you some exercises, you got to execute them, you got to work on it. They're not asking you to believe in the exercises, they're asking you to do the exercises. And then you will see the results. The results will reinforce that, yes, this is working. Similarly, a process of Krishna consciousness is not a process that imposes any kind of a belief system or a faith system. It's a process that has to be executed. Krishna consciousness is about experiencing Krishna consciousness. And any bona fide process, be it conducted in a Hare Krishna temple, or be it conducted in a mosque, or be it in a church, or any other temple, if it is conducted with a point of view to really understand who are you, who is God, and how can you establish a relationship with God, is Krishna consciousness. There's no difference. Krishna is just another name for God. And according to the Shastra, it is a principal name of God because it encompasses all of the names of God. Krishna means the one who's most attractive. It's not a sectarian name. It's not, and Rama means the one who's a reservoir of all pleasure. Allah means the one who's the most merciful. These are all the names of the same person. So it's like people who are arguing that, doesn't make any sense. You're talking about the same person. So why people argue is because they have very narrow, selfish, and misunderstood ideas of religion. Based on time, place, circumstances, cultures, and so on and so forth, the rituals change based on the situation. So someone starts believing that if you worship that same God, in exactly the same ritualistic scientific process or mechanical process that I've devised, you're going to achieve God. If you worship Him in any other way, you're going to go to hell. That's a very ridiculous kind of a position.
But what I wanted to point out is that that's exactly what is written here. That people who do not like the word. Let me read the whole line. According to Bhagavad Gita, they are all bereft of the factual knowledge due to their aesthetic way of life.
Atheistic way of life.
Atheistic way of life. They are actually sinful rascals and are lowest among the men. And they are referring politicians, philosophers, and scientists. They're all blind and sinful rascals. Would you explain that? And
Yeah.
why?
So the objective is society has to be God conscious. If someone who's not God conscious has their own agenda. So again, I'm not entering the whole debate on scientists, but I mean, we can talk about it at a separate time. But the thing is, if you look at most politicians, the objective of the Varnashrama system, the way it's set up, is that the politicians or the rulers have to take advice from the learned class and rule for the benefit of the people. But in this day and age, whether you take this country or any other country, majority of the idea is to benefit themselves and rather than anybody else. So if the motivation of the people who are trying to lead is unclear, then how will they lead? And who will they lead? That is a problem. Right? For scientific people, I'll give you the simple example, right? From anthropology. This whole debate happened in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you followed it, but about 7-8 years ago, regarding intelligent design versus creationism. And so, for any scientific process, if you're a true scientist, if you completely ignore a set of evidence and say that if you make any argument that's going to somehow prove direction A versus direction B, I'm going to ridicule you and ignore that evidence. Does that now make you predisposed to, isn't that being dogmatic?
That is.
So that's exactly what the opponents of intelligent design are doing. So when someone says, okay, you explain to me one thing, right? And this is mathematically proven, right? That from single-celled organisms, first of all, there's no evidence that life comes from chemicals. There's no such evidence, right? Nobody's ever taken chemicals into a lab and come out with actual life, right? So that's never happened, and there's no possibility happening because that's not how it works. Right? Secondly, from single-celled animals, if you look at the time duration that they give from the time evolution started, the real probability that the evolution happened to a point where there's such diversity and all that is like 100 billion, like very, very remote. So you're saying that it's greater chance that is true than somebody created it.
Yeah.
So you're willing to hold on to a single thread, not even a thread in my opinion, and you're completely rejecting that it's even, saying that is it not even possible that somebody created it? So your premise is that it's definitely not possible. So let's find any evidence that proves that is not true. So if you're really seeking the truth, would you not be open to all possibilities? And logically, if you're looking at all possibilities, isn't it at least possible that there was a creator? Or is it not even possible? Right?
It's very, very a possibility.
Right. So so look at it very scientifically. If you're just looking at it scientifically, and your opinion is that it's not even possible that there's a creator, then something wrong with you, because you're closing your mind to a possibility which is overwhelmingly evident. It's overwhelmingly evident. So much variety, and saying that except this planet Earth, there's no life anywhere else. When they search for life, They're searching for carbon-based life forms that need water. Who made that premise? Why are you making the assumption that all life forms are carbon-based? Who gave you that idea? It's just a made-up idea, right? So then you're looking for life forms that are carbon-based. I'll tell you, in the Mariana Trench, you know the Mariana Trenches? It's one of the deepest points of the Pacific Ocean. There's no light, there's no oxygen. And there are a lot of toxic gases that come out of volcanoes, underwater volcanoes, that exist under the ocean. The toxic gases come out. From all practical reasons, it's toxic gases, no oxygen, no light. No possibility of life. There's light there. The life forms that live in that area use the toxic gases. That's what they use. They don't need any light. And they still survive. So, by all practical assessment, somebody gave that environment to a scientist, his assessment would be that there's no life there. No possibility of life. Because it's got methane gas and this and that, and there's no oxygen, but then there's life. So, with every point that gets discovered, anthropology is the same way. Right? I mean, there is really no evidence of any of this. So basically, all the evidence that points to any mistakes that might exist or gaps that might exist are explained away as, that's how it is. So basically, that's how this whole process works. I'm not talking about people who are doing research in physics. I'm saying in general, the whole scientific premise is that there's no God. Einstein is considered the greatest scientist. He was not atheistic. A lot of these great scientists, Isaac Newton was not atheistic. So this talks about scientists whose sole objective is to prove that you can. So their question is, if there is God, I should be able to detect God using instruments. That's the whole idea of material science. Material science is what we're talking about, not spiritual science. Now, simple thing, consciousness. What is the symptom of life? Consciousness. Human beings have evolved consciousness. Animals have slightly less evolved consciousness. More instinct. Plants have even less evolved consciousness. It's a symptom of life. You cannot detect consciousness with any instrument. I've talked to neurologists, and except there's one book out by a neurologist who kind of starts exploring consciousness, but most people stay away from consciousness because it cannot be explained. How do you explain consciousness? You can explain the connections between the brain, different neurons of the brain, electric impulses, but you cannot explain consciousness. So medical science is completely silent on the idea of consciousness. Why? Because you can't explain it. So the idea is that the leaders of society are driving the people that they're leading to a godless civilization. That you're in control, and there's no God. And that is the whole idea. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is referring to. That if you are leading, and you yourself have no idea where you're going, how can you lead? If the goal of human life is to be happy, and you're the leader of society, you yourself are miserable. How can you lead? What are you leading them into? If you're a teacher, and if you don't understand the subject matter, how can you teach? There was a professor of religion who would come to meet Srila Prabhupada one time. And so he was introduced to Prabhupada that he's professor of religion, so on and so forth. So Prabhupada asked him, so, what is your understanding of God? The person said, well, it's not so easy to explain so quickly. God is a very complicated concept. And so he said, okay, explain to me however you want. I have all day. And so that person tried to not answer him because it's not an easy concept to explain accordingly. And then Prabhupada called one of the kids were running around. He had a big jar of laddus. And he called the little child and said, who's God? The little child said, Krishna. And then Prabhupada gave the child a laddu. And they said, who's Krishna? The Supreme Personality of Godhead. Another laddu, go. And then he turned to his disciple and said, if a person professes to teach some subject, and doesn't really know that subject that well, what would you call him? Disciple said cheater. And he looked at him and said, even a child in our movement knows who's God. And you have a PhD and you have no idea. Why are you teaching such nonsense to people? So again, the point I'm trying to make is that Prabhupada would always say that you're searching after God and you have no idea who God is. And here, according to Shastra, according to the bona fide acharyas, we're saying, here is God. Here is how you can achieve God. Why don't you accept? What is the problem? So the idea is not that we are trying to denounce other religious paths or anything of that sort. The idea is that there is a process that one needs to follow.
I believe like science, religion, philosophy, they all go hand in harmony. I don't know, every text I read from, or I've heard of from Srimad Bhagavatam, it creates science and religion as against each other. I think that they can or they should be in harmony with each other. It has common grounds. I don't know why we keep on comparing. That was my original question.
So the question is valid. The answer is actually, it's a misunderstanding of the way this statement is made. So the denouncement is not of science itself, because everything is science. Science is pursuit of truth. Philosophy is pursuit of truth. They all have to come together. But if the objective of the modern day scientist is to somehow disprove the existence of God, it's a problem. And that's exactly what modern science does. The objective of scientific research, they had the God particle discovered. The whole idea is to explain that there's no such thing as God. If that becomes the objective, it becomes very hard for it to be truthful, because ultimately, God is the absolute truth. So if your scientific research is leading to a fact that is explaining that there's no God, its premise is wrong. The fundamental premise is wrong. So the problem is like this, right? So, and I was just speaking this example to somebody else the other day, that you may learn the alphabet, you may learn the words, but if the basic premise is not there, you may not understand what's actually being said and why it's being said. So similarly, let's say you may learn the Arabic alphabet. You learn the Arabic alphabet and you start trying to read an Arabic text. But somebody forgets to tell you that Arabic is actually written from right to left. So just like English or any other language, you start reading it from left to right. And although you've learned all the alphabets, what you're reading makes no sense. Because the basic premise that you got to read from right to left was not told to you. But similarly, if our basic premise is that, we were not created by God, we have no relation, there's no such thing as God, it's imaginary, then everything else we study or everything else we accept, the basic premise is wrong.
But if you see the other way, like science is trying to explain how things are made or are coming from. If ultimately science is going to lead you to God, like how it's created, why can't they be in harmony? Why do you have to explain people that they are separate or against each other? I think
there is no against each other. I don't understand where you're getting that from. But
from the text that I read from here, I'm getting it's against each other.
No, the idea defined here is that people who are atheistically... So again, if someone is atheistically saying there is no God, that's a problem.
I think people who are atheist, should go and learn about science, and then it's going to lead them to religion and God ultimately.
Right, but the premise has to be correct. The idea is that if the premise is not correct, no matter how much you read, it's never going to get you anywhere.
So, again, I don't have much brains, I don't have much IQ. I just know, I just get this feeling that, there is God somewhere. I mean, it has to be. It's not a coincidence that the whole world is made up. I'm not debating that. Neither I'm debating that there's single God. What I'm debating is, why are we debating things which can be in harmony and making them against each other, or people who should be in harmony.
No, the point is not that. The point
people
is
who believe in God, people who don't believe in God. I think people are same, and religion and philosophy and science and everything is same. Everything is made by God. Why are they against each other?
there's no against each other. Right? That's not the point.
Instead of hand in hand, you know what
The
I mean?
point I'm trying to make is that very simple, right? That we want to be happy, and according to Bhagavad Gita and according to our Shastras, the way to become happy is to find a connection with God. It's a very simple process that's defined. That even with our other engagements and other life pursuits, we can actually practice, which is chanting the name of God. That's a process that's been defined, and that's a simple thing. So the idea of Srimad Bhagavatam is just that. That the idea of getting together in these groups and trying to understand a little deeper what is spiritual science. How can we actually practice it? It's just that. The problem with this so much propaganda outside that the general premise is that someone who's practicing spiritual life is regressing. Is what we're fighting against. Whole idea that if you go into a classroom or a science laboratory, then you got to not think of God is what we're against. Because ultimately, that's the supreme truth. That's got to be consistent across. You cannot have a different logic when you're in your church or temple, different logic when you're in your laboratory, and a different logic. So it has to all come together. Because it's the absolute truth. And so the idea that if people are being led by people who are godless, where will they take you? Yes?
I think one of the ways we can look at it is if we define science, I think it is just trying to articulate what God has created. For example, gravity.
Right.
Newton came up with the thought of gravity. Was it not there before? It's not the case. It's just that he articulated it.
Right.
He experimented it and he realized it and he explained the people that it. Probably the dispute here is that we are trying to isolate such people who try to go on a different tangent and dispute that God himself is absent and try to experiment in the directions which lead you in the direction that you start putting questions on that.
No, so you're absolutely right. And the problem is this. There are people, as I was saying earlier, that if you start a discussion saying, isn't it even possible that there is God or a creator? The argument of the other side, who are hardcore atheistic people, is that that's a ludicrous position to even take. Which is what I'm debating. How can that be the case? If you're an open-minded scientific person, how can you take a position that even considering the possibility of creator is itself a foolish position? So the moment I say that isn't it possible there is God, that I become foolish. And someone says, clearly there's no God, everything created by chance, is very scientific and is very truthful.
Maybe that argument will go very well there, but with common people, I mean, if I read this text and if I make my child read this text, he's bound to be offended by that, or he or she, whosoever reads
Right.
it. I think there should be. I think this language needs to be a little normalized. That's what I think.
Right.
I'm not making assumption that God
No,
is
that's
not
fine.
there.
Yeah, understand. Any other questions or comments?
So I think Prasad Prabhu was trying to explain it well when
Just like your child. The idea is that there's compassion in your heart. You really want the child to be doing the right thing. So your chastisement is more out of compassion than out of any anger or any kind of, malintent. So you may sometimes the child, or when they go older or whatever, right? When the child may be so have done something right or something such a way that the parent says, "There's no dinner for you. Go to your room, and you're not going to get any dinner tonight." Now you're starving the child for one night, but the objective is not to kind of starve the child. The objective is to teach them a lesson that they will learn, out of compassion. So when a teacher like Srila Prabhupada criticizes, the idea is to somehow benefit the persons that are being, at least they realize that this is something wrong here. So I'll conclude with an example. The chanting the holy name is such a powerful thing that I'll read from the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll read from. This is a story of Ajamil. I'll read from a couple of verses from that. This is a conversation between the Vishnu Dutas and the Yamadutas in the life of Ajamil. It says, one who chants the holy name of the Lord is immediately freed from the reactions of unlimited sins. Even if he chants indirectly to indicate something else, jokingly, for musical entertainment, or even neglectfully. This is accepted by all the learned scholars of scriptures. And then goes on to say that if one chants the holy name of Hari and then dies because of an accidental misfortune, such as falling from the top of the house, slipping and suffering broken bones while traveling on the road, being bitten by a serpent, being afflicted by pain and high fever, or being injured by a weapon, one is immediately absolved from having to enter hellish life even though he is sinful. So, the idea of God or Krishna is not that he's some kind of... God is not some kind of tyrant waiting for us to say, if you make a mistake, I'm going to punish you. He's like our parent. He's like, he wants us to love him. And he's waiting for us to have that interaction with him. That's the whole idea. So Krishna consciousness is all about a positive experience. It's not that if you don't do this, you're gonna suffer in hell or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is, this is joyful. This is a joyful activity that must be performed joyfully. So it's not like if you don't do this, it's a sinful activity or anything. It's not like that. It's like this is an opportunity as opposed to a risk. Right? So risk is something that if you don't address it, something bad will happen. An opportunity is if you take it, something positive will happen. This is an opportunity as opposed to a risk. The only risk is if we don't take the opportunity. So the opportunity is that we have the opportunity to read about Krishna, hear about Krishna, to glorify Krishna, to sincerely try to chant Krishna's name. And that opportunity is available to us so easily. It's not like we have to become some kind of Vedic scholars, or we have to change our lifestyle, or we have to give up our jobs and live in the forest, or nothing like that is recommended. We continue doing what we're doing. We continue living our life. If you're in technology, work in technology. If you're a physician, work as a physician. If you're in business, you do your business. Do whatever you need to do. But understand that ultimately, the objective of life is to become connected with God. Then you start saying, if that is my ultimate objective, then all the other activities that I do have to somehow result in that. Right? So if your objective is to win an Olympic gold medal, then no matter what you do, you may be sleeping, but you're sleeping so that you can rest your body, that you can be strong the next day. You lift weights, you're lifting weights so that you can build muscles. If you're running so that you can build stamina. If you're eating nutrition so that you can then, facilitate your exercise and your other training regimen. If you're doing training, right? Somebody asks an Olympic athlete that, hey, let's do this activity. First thing he's going to think is, how's that going to impact my training regimen? How's that going to impact my ability to win this gold medal? That's how they think, correct? Or even when you're in high school, right? All of us went through high school, and we were trying to get into various colleges or schools for further education. Our whole objective was that, how do I study in such a way that I can get into that institution? And any activity, somebody gives you a book to read, saying, let's read this book, You're going to say, is that something relevant to what I'm going to help me? If it's not relevant, then you're not going to read it. Tomorrow's exam, someone gives you a book to read, saying, read this book. You're going to think, reading this book, is it going to somehow help me in my exam? The answer is no. Then most sane people will not read it. I mean, they will start thinking, why should I read this, which has no bearing on tomorrow. Right? Like anything, any activity we do. We work in our project deadline, right? A lot of you work on projects, and if you work on a project deadline, and you're doing 3 tasks, you're going to start thinking, how are these 3 tasks? Do all these tasks need to be done for the deadline? And the answer is no, then you're not going to do it. Someone gives you task number 6, and you're going to say, well, this task has nothing to do with the deadline tomorrow. Why are we doing this today? So similarly, our spiritual life pursuit becomes like that. You're pursuing spiritual life, you start thinking in terms of how we can maximize all the activities that we perform to help our spiritual life. Even eating, sleeping, recreation, whatever we do, everything has to somehow help our main goal of life. This is the devotees who are practicing Krishna consciousness. Even when they rest, they're resting so that the next day they can be refreshed, so that they can execute their duties. You have a job, you earn money, you do all that so that you can then raise a family that can be Krishna conscious. So that becomes the objective of life. If that is the objective, then that needs to be executed in that way. That's the whole idea. Any questions? No questions?
Seems like no question. No more questions.
Everyone is convinced? Or still not convinced?
No, it was very good, very good topic. Yeah, a
It
lot
will
of
take
points
time to
came out.
consume it.
Lot of good points came out of it.
We need to comprehend everything you say.
Yeah, right, right.
People who have some difference of opinions, or if they think that this text, as he said, if a child reads it, he or she may look at it or comprehend it differently than the matured people who have, who are knowledgeable in that area. They will comprehend. We may need to comprehend.
The idea is that Shastra is not meant to be read on your own. You need guidance. And when somebody guides how to accept that particular concept, you need to accept it with an open mind. What ends up happening is it's like you take a book full of notes in it and saying, I have a book full of notes, this is my understanding. So, tell me where I'm wrong. The teacher cannot really teach you. If you want to learn music, you learn all sorts of wrong techniques on the violin, and you say, well, just show me how to play this tune. Very hard, because the technique itself was wrong. So the premise, what ends up happening is, the years and years of education that we have, we end up having certain ideas and concepts that are built over time. And many of them are not transferable when you start studying spiritual science. Because although we know to read the words, we learn English when we were at school, we know how to read the words, we know what the words mean. When they're strung together, we start analyzing that using our preconceived notions. So the idea is that it's not a question of a child reading or adult reading. That's the wrong way to look at it. The idea is, a simple concept is being presented, that the objective of human life is to be happy. Nobody denies that. It's a process that's given that the only way you can be happy is if you find connection with God. It's a hypothesis, right? Nobody's asking you to believe that hypothesis. So it's not a question of internalizing the hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. A simple hypothesis. Right? That the only way to become happy is to find connection with God. And a process is given that this is how you can find that connection. An intelligent person who's sincere can follow the hypothesis, can take the hypothesis, follow the process, and realize the results. As simple as that. So there's really no question of internalizing and understanding and agreeing. Nobody's asking anybody to agree to anything. So it's not a question that you have to agree with me. That's not the premise. I'm not selling anything. I'm not asking you to accept what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, there's a premise which everybody agrees to. Nobody's saying no to that point, that objective human life is to be happy. And I'm making a hypothesis which I'm not asking you to believe. I'm saying this is the hypothesis per Shastra. This is not my assertion. Per Shastra, by all the acharyas who came in the line of disciplic succession, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Shankaracharya, all the acharyas who came, Jesus Christ, anybody you take, everybody will say the same thing. Their hypothesis is that the only way to become happy is to find connection with God. Now, someone might say, why should I believe that hypothesis? Why should I even consider that hypothesis? The answer is that some of the most decent, caring, compassionate people who ever walked the earth are these people. Be it the people who came in India, be it all the acharyas that talked about, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, Porkshuraj Babaji Maharaj, talk about other acharyas you may have heard of, like Ramanujacharya who came in South India, Vishnu Swami, talk about Shankaracharya, all these acharyas who came, plus acharyas who came outside of India. You have Prophet Muhammad, you have Jesus Christ, you have Gautam Buddha, all these acharyas who are connected and who are the most decent people who walked the earth, who were so compassionate. That is their premise. So the question is, should I believe some rascal who's out there who's saying this is not correct, or should I accept the premise that's made by these people who have nothing but the compassion of other living entities in their heart? So this is a hypothesis. So the simple thing is, okay. So till now nobody's asking to believe anything. The idea is now, okay, this is the premise. What is the process to actually test this is true or not? The process that's given is, what is the process that can be actually executed in this day and age? So if I tell you that the process I'm giving you is that you have to go and live in a forest for 15 years, and it's not practical. I cannot tell you to do that. I cannot do that myself. Right? If I say stand on your head and do some kind of asana it's not going to work. So what is the thing that I can actually execute practically? Krishna was telling Arjun wanted to leave the battlefield and go away to the forest. Krishna called him a fool, said this is ridiculous. That's not you will not be able to do it. You're active by nature. Go and fight with somebody in the forest because that's your nature. You're Kshatriya. If you decide to go to the forest, you'll fight with somebody there. You will not be able to live like a beggar because that's not your nature. So what is the process that can be followed, that can actually be executed in this day and age? Prabhupada came to give us the Krishna consciousness. Okay, you chant Krishna's name. If you have other names of God that you're chanting, that you're connecting with, fine. If someone is of the Islamic faith and they're chanting the 99 names of Allah, good. Chant sincerely, become a sincere Muslim. Right? Shouldn't become a sincere Christian. Christianity, one of the tenets of Christianity is that thou shalt not kill. Why are you maintaining so many slaughterhouses and killing? As Prabhupada would say, why are you killing so many animals and then your idea is that animals don't have soul. That has no basis. That is not scientific. Is it scientific to say animals have no soul? And why do you keep dogs? And if your dog is injured, why do you get so upset? If you claim to be so conscientious, then why would your rules change based on the species? If you're talking about, everybody understands that being racist is not very good, right? It's common understanding. Most decent people know that racism is not good. And why is being species such a good thing? You can be compassionate to certain species, but completely indiscriminate to other species. If the animal belongs in a dog species or a cat species, then if you cause any harm to that species, then you can be sent to jail. Like Michael Wick was sent to jail for 2 years for causing harm to dog species. But if you cause harm to cow species, no problem. So, where is the consistency? No consistency. So the point that's being made is that it's a process that's given, which is consistent with the truth. So you can follow practically that, live a Krishna conscious life, which is very simple. You don't have to do anything very dramatic. Everybody eats at home. There's nobody who doesn't eat. Right? So the idea is that if you eat, then you make it as an offering to God. So you whatever you make, you put it in front of the picture of God for 5 minutes, eat it. Become spiritualized. It's a process that's given. Now you may say, I don't believe it. Nobody's asking you to believe it. Try it and see what happens. Chanting the holy name, I don't believe it. Try it, see what happens. Someone tries following a Krishna conscious life for a period of time, 6 months, 3 months, whatever period of time. If there's no transformation of the heart, give it up. Try something else. May not work for you. I guarantee it's going to work. But if it doesn't work for you, then you're absolutely free to say that, yes, I tried it with all sincerity. I tried the experiment. It didn't do anything for me. So I'm going to do something else. Absolutely fine. But if someone says, I don't believe it, I need to internalize it, it has no meaning. And moreover, there's a crisis here. Someone has a deadly disease, doesn't have the opportunity to go and understand what the treatment is, how it's going to work. It's going to take the medicine. It's going to die. Grains of sand are slipping away from our hand. And before we know it, we can make all experiments and still not follow anything. So please make a sincere effort to chant Krishna's name. Make a sincere effort, to come to this program. Devendra Prabhu's and Tripti are organizing so sincerely. And more importantly, this is not something you're going to do for them or for anybody else. Do it for yourself. Practice spiritual path sincerely for a period of time. Take it as a challenge, just like any other challenge, right? Take it as a challenge and do it for 3 months, 6 months sincerely. See what happens. And if you don't, ultimately, it's not a question of what I speak. I can speak anything and then you go away. That's not the point. You have to feel transformation of the heart. That is the definition of a spiritual process that transforms. If it doesn't happen, then it's pointless. Hearing katha and going to satsang, going to temple, is pointless. It doesn't result in transformation of the heart. That's why Prabhupada is so critical, because Prabhupada came, he was able to make transformation of heart of people who had no idea what was going on. Because they started experiencing the results. Let's not get hung up on the specific words in the text that we read. The idea is, how can I personally spiritualize myself? What can I do? And that's as simple as it. Okay? Anything else? Any points? Anything else? We'll stop here.
We'll start. We'll start.
Somebody can take the offering plate?
Yeah.
Thank you. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Who's performing art?
We'll sing Hare Krishna first.
Yeah. Whatever you like.
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta
Divine grace. ऐसी भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, नमाचार्य श्री हरदास ठाकुर की जय, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय, ब्रजभूमि वृंदावन धाम की जय, जगन्नाथपुर पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र धाम की जय, मायापुरी धाम की जय, गंगामयी जमुनमयी की जय, भक्ति गोविंद तुलसी महारानी की जय, समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय, मिठाई गौर प्रेमानंद प्रभुपाद की जय। Kids want to sing?
Yeah, I will.
Brandon, come. We'll break it. Play your own. start.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Radhe Radhe Hari Hiranyakashi
नरसिंह भगवान की जय, महाराज की जय। हरि बोल।
Yeah.
Namaste
I want to take sweet.
Which likes people. He likes people very much. अभी इनका लग गया उधर आ जा रहा है
Washington? No, sorry.
Did you go to the 24 hours?
Yeah.
You went there? Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go, but I heard it was really good.
Cousins were there.
Akshay and Anish? Yeah. They were supposed to pick me up, but they didn't stop by.
I sang on Saturday morning. Someone sang Saturday afternoon.
Wait, what?
I sang on Saturday morning. Afternoon sang on Saturday afternoon. Also on Saturday.
I didn't know that. They didn't tell me they were singing.
Are you?
Yeah. It was a schedule for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. They told me, they were like, you want to you can sing. I was like, but nobody contacted me. They're like, yeah, you're on the schedule. I was like, what? I was like, okay. And I guess one of them probably wanted me to sing instead of them.
Okay.
Yeah, probably us. So, he sings good though, right?
Yeah.
Did you do a Manzara too?
Yeah, I did one.